your wife's in me, damn.
I'm gonna keep that in.
Yeah.
If we're casuals, there's one person that we haven't talked about quite enough. It's the man that we all know, but I'm about to bring up maybe we don't know or we're not sure we know. I want to talk about who the real Conor McGregor is. So let's take a trip down memory lane. He's a two division weight class champion in Ireland. He joins the UFC. He comes in hot. He's winning, but he's talking trash. But the reason he's so charismatic is it was all fun. You almost didn't hear a lot of the mean and bad things he was saying because of the way he said it. And the fans, even outside of Ireland, just immediately fell in love with him. He rises to the top. He wins the featherweight belt. He has that the two fight series with Nate. He then beats Eddie, wins the lightweight belt. From there, he retires from the sport almost immediately, not really interested in defending the belt there. And we see him go over to fight Floyd Mayweather. And some of the trash talk leading up to that fight was ugly. It wasn't really what I would recommend for a family environment. And after that fight goes off, then we have the Khabib fight. And this is kind of the darkest point that you're going to have in a lead up to a fight. I mean, you have, from even before to him throwing the dolly at the bus, I mean, the serious injuries coming out of it. We have all of the security on hand for that fight. Even the fallout after, Khabib, to rile up a guy like Khabib that bad, you really have to get under his skin. Um, it was just a dark week leading up to that fight. So we don't hear a ton from Conor for a bit after until he comes back to fight Cowboy. And we're excited to see Conor go crazy. It's still the strong fan base there. And who comes out but a friendly Conor? Nothing bad to say about Cowboy. Respect for the families, his kids, and the same Conor in the cage is there. I mean, the fight ended in under a minute. You know, a flying knee. We threw shoulder strikes, and next thing you know, Cowboys in the ground.
Head
And
kick. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it was a quick fight and the same effectiveness we're used to, but not the same lead up. And everyone's questioning, well, why did we see this? If he gets the Khabib fight again, do they just go back to, all the trash talking, things like that? And now we have Poirier and Conor, which was originally supposed to be part two, that is, a boxing match for charity. Dana pulls in and says, no, 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 we're going to make a UFC fight. And who shows up that week but Charming Conor? And it was Charming Conor, and it was believable Conor. It didn't feel like he was trying to be nice. He felt like he was being himself, and it almost threw me off more because of it. He didn't seem like he was going out of his way. He was talking what I thought I knew that Conor the most because of just how genuine it felt. Obviously, the fight didn't go the way he wanted it to, and he changed things leading up to this most recent fight of not having his family there and really being able to focus. But he didn't do much media leading up to fight week, and fight week came, and it was different. And he
Yeah.
didn't really say things that were all that different than what he was saying before. What was really different is how mean and dark he meant it. It wasn't fun like we're used to. It was just, I don't know the right words. It was dark, mean, and almost hard to watch at times, even being a fan of him. Making it more personal, talking family, things like that. And I think seeing this picture, seeing ups and downs and personality, fun, mean, nice, and all of that, I think it just begs the question of who is the real Conor McGregor. We know he's a salesman. We know he's a marketer. But what do we know? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, some of these like fights and the different personalities that we saw heading into them, I almost forgot. Like, you think back to like the Jose Aldo, they did like a global like campaign
Tour.
tour.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you went back through the clips, you pull some stuff out, and you'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe he said that."
They're
But
just as mean as what he was saying to Poirier. It's just he said them differently.
yeah, it was. Yeah, I think he still just had that like mystique behind him, where everyone was still just like, "Who is this guy?" He had this like unbelievable belief in himself. He just seemed almost invincible, and I don't know if it's just because we've seen him lose too many times. I think part of it is he got smoked by Khabib. He got beaten twice
By the number 4 pound for pound fighter
Yeah,
in the UFC. Anyone would get beat by him
but
twice in that division.
but he lost, and yeah, there's no shame really in losing to Poirier and to Khabib. I think potentially 1 and 2 in terms of like pound for pound in my book.
Right.
Um,
But that's not the
but
way the
that's
public's handling it. Let me just point that out.
yeah. But I think it's more so the issue is we see him just sort of looking desperate and looking almost
Yeah.
like he's just clawing for something to lash out for, and it almost just looks a little bit more pathetic when he's lying there on the
Just
ground
howling.
insulting him. And I think you know as far as like who the real Conor is, I think it's complex.
Yeah.
I think he's someone who probably may drink too much or do some things. I mean, you look at his behavior. I mean,
Totally
man,
true.
punching an old man in a pub while drinking tells me he probably goes through phases where he potentially drinks too much or parties too much. And it feels like when we see him for like the cowboy fight, he's like bright-eyed and clear-headed and just
Yep.
talking about how he's set everything right in his life. And to me, it kind of says like I'm not partying anymore when he
Right.
says things like that. I don't want to assume anything, but to tweet, and even Khabib said that on the Mike Tyson podcast he was on. He probably was when he tweeted that thing about Khabib's father recently.
Right.
He's probably drunk and then just wakes
Yeah.
up and deletes the tweet. I think he's
Right.
probably like still like using drugs in some capacity. He's had a couple of allegations against him that we don't have to get into, but like
Right.
to me, it makes me wonder if he's just putting himself in situations, being out at bars and clubs, and yeah, that's what I wonder about because he doesn't seem like an outwardly jerkish person.
Right.
Like, I think like you see him like with fans and when he's in the right state of mind, he seems like a very like reasonable guy. He came from like humble beginnings, so
He
I
gets
don't think
chased around the world.
yeah,
That
he
level of
is one of
paparazzi.
like and I think the other thing too, he's not like in the same on the same level of every other MMA fighter.
Any other MMA fighter.
Like
Yeah.
he is
Not
one of
even
the
Khabib.
most famous people on the planet. I remember people talking to me about MMA when he was coming up, like when he was fighting against Dennis Seaver. Like he was like almost still like a no one in the UFC, but
Right.
people were talking about him before he was even remotely challenging for a title.
Right.
And he, look at his following on social media. I think he is. I don't think we realize how famous he is. I think he's hanging out with Justin
We're
Bieber.
used to seeing him. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
he
think of
is.
him the MMA guy, but he's a world icon.
Yeah, and I think that probably plays a factor too. Like you just like who is that famous that hasn't had like a bout of depression or had some issues
Drug
like
use, alcohol.
handling the fame. Yeah, and you pile like a Justin Bieber level of fame on top of like someone who's like a savage, like a fighter. I mean,
Right.
it's probably a volatile mix, and so I think he's maybe not a bad person, but I think he probably deals with he's in environments that it's hard for us to understand, and that's at least my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no quick way to answer it. I heard John Kavanaugh, his coach, once say that Conor was kind of the kid growing up that always had that quick-witted answer. And I
Yeah,
think that's what really showed, early on in the career. When he was trash talking, he'd be in the mic, and you could tell he wasn't thinking too deeply about his insults coming back, and they were always smooth and coming off nicely. And I think we always have a tendency of trying to one up ourselves, right? And I think that's what he did, but it just got to the point where you don't need to one up it. You don't have to go after someone's family. You don't have to go after and make, the next lead up even darker. And maybe you'll make a little more money, but big picture, even the ethics behind it. And again, I know we're talking about cage fighting, but there are things that you just leave out.
yeah,
But to your point, I think we see kind of a transition, and I think he generally is that nice guy you mentioned. I mean, walking around in the streets, he gets chased around by paparazzi. He's gonna have $1 billion in a few years, is what he claims. I mean, everyone knows who he is. It's almost hard to be friendly to fans at that point because there's so many. They chase you around everywhere you go, and most
yeah,
of the interactions that we seem friendly and seem genuine. Um, However, to your other point, I mean, you see him kind of desperately trying to hold on to anything he can with MMA, and whether it's calling out Poirier for a fourth time, Poirier agreeing, and not because he wants to fight Conor, he knows it's the biggest payday he can get. Anyone he fights next is still going to be the biggest payday that guy's ever had in MMA. And interestingly, like Conor is making so much money elsewhere that he seems to want MMA so badly now that he didn't want for all that time. So it's a weird thing to juxtapose there. But I honestly think at this point in his life, the Conor we saw for Poirier Part 2 is probably the realest guy who's not trying to sell, but I think he's gotten so good at marketing and selling that he at times has trouble turning it off. I
Yeah,
think at times we don't even know when he's doing it. Like when he'll put out an Instagram photo and say like I'm the king and you guys are all children. Like I wonder if he's laughing as he posts that. Like he's just pulling some attention in, and it's been part of his bravado, and we want to think that he really thinks that, but maybe he knows he's ranked ninth in the division. He's never been afraid to fight someone, but he also probably knows he's not the best there is right now. But he's not going to openly say that. And I think, I mean, Chael Sonnen says it sometimes, but one of the reasons Conor can sell so well is because we don't know if he's in on the joke or not. We don't know if we're in the joke or not.
yeah, yeah. That's a really great way to put it. I think as much as I want to believe he's like this like 4D chess player mastermind, I do think sometimes it's just whatever mood he's in, and I
Hmm.
think it's like you said. Sometimes you have a hard time turning it off.
Yep.
I think got people who are in front of the cameras. I've heard like famous YouTubers talk about this, where it's like you just have a hard time like your reality gets distorted if you're just in front of cameras all the
Yeah.
time. You just like forget who you actually are, and so I think it depends on what day of the week it is. I think it depends on what's happening in his life, but yeah, I do wonder, and I think that's a good way of a good reference to what Chael Sonnen said, that
Yeah.
sometimes you're like, is this serious? Is he actually mad? Is he like with the Dolly thing? Did he not think anyone was actually going to get hurt and just
Right.
wanted to like
No one
scare
thinks that's a
the
good
media?
idea, but that's the way we sell a fight too.
Yeah. And then there's like the is he marketing a fight because he knows he like wants to make this the biggest fight ever, or is he just with his friends from the neighborhood and they're just treating this like an old school brawl? Like
Yeah.
I think that he is a very intriguing character in that sense, because I think there is that part of him. Even just like 8 years ago, he was poor.
Yeah.
He was
Which is
not living
a
on food
decade, less
stamps.
than a decade. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
incredible.
and so yeah, I think it's hard for us to know for certain. But I'm glad we got to cover this, because I think it is an interesting topic, and he's obviously drawing a lot of criticism. But even you and I are still quoting him just
Yeah.
as a joke, like prior to recording this. So it's like
Oh, it's in
he's
there. The recording's in there.
yeah.
But
But
it's so like, and you think of him staying attached to Khabib, like with these tweets that we're talking about, him deleting or him not. But if you want to stay relevant, stay attached to someone at the top of the game. I mean, something that he and the whole camp, John Kavanaugh, do too, like this level of storytelling. Like after the fight, Kavanaugh said, "Yeah, the first round kind of went how we wanted, and then we were expecting to get the finish in the second round." Really? I mean, a lot of people thought the first round was a 10-8. That's how you thought it was going to go. But immediately, when a casual fan hears that, they think, oh, well, really? Conor was going to pull this one out of the bag. It immediately changes the whole perception of it. And I think not just Conor, but the whole camp have almost his whole career been aligned on like a lot of these things and the way they outwardly talk about them. I mean, if you want to know how to market, study Conor McGregor.
yeah, yeah, and I am curious to see if he comes back and if he can fight someone who's not named Dustin Poirier or Khabib. Maybe he gets that swagger back and knocks someone out. It's hard to. The other thing too, as we talk about, like, is he falling off? Is his career not what it used to be? It's just so hard to judge when the two guys he's fought are just
Two of the
two of
best
the
lightweights
best
of all
pound for
time.
pound fighters ever. So
So, and to the desperation you're talking about, did you think that in the last fight he looked like he was fighting angry? Because it did to me, and nothing good comes from that. He charged him. He's doing kicks on a leg that he claims is already half broken. He tried to pull
yeah,
a guillotine, which he's never had a submission finish in the UFC. It it just looked like he wanted to prove a point rather than fight well. Honestly,
yeah, yeah. I mean, you look at how he fought Eddie Alvarez versus even how he fought Nate the second time, it's
Didn't look calm, cool, and
laid
collected.
back, like it's almost like that Zen type look. Even Jose Aldo coming out of the gate,
Yep.
that's what everyone always talked about. He looked pretty zen and relaxed, and
Yeah.
Aldo was like tense and angry,
Right.
and you saw
Right.
what happened there. Yeah, so
And we see what happens here with the tense and anger. Yep.
yeah,
But you can't. It's one of those things where you can't just tell yourself, "I need to be calm." It's to your point, like he's thinking his UFC career at the top could be over. Like that is not something that's going to help calm you down. You're going to want to grasp that in any way you can. So
yeah,
I know he said he's wanted to fight, and maybe he does. It's hard. It's almost hard to match him up with a guy at like, you know, ranks 5 through 10 in that division, just because any fight he's in is big because he's Conor McGregor. However, you're not going to find someone that matches his level of fame in general, let alone as you go down the ranks. But who shows up at the press conference next time? We don't know.
yeah.
And this is the true mystery of who Conor McGregor is.